everyone, and welcome to the Sangamon Experience Community Trailblazers tribute for this month. I know that this month can be kind of overwhelming with Lincoln's birthday coming up, and we also have Black History Month this month. And there's a lot of different celebrations going on. And it's very important to remember those who blazed a trail before us and to highlight individuals who may not get a lot of recognition. And so the Sangamon Experience has been trying to promote these individuals in the best way that we can. And that is by digging into the research and finding those key individuals that made a difference in our community. And we are highlighting these individuals in Sangamon County. And for Black History Month, we found a number of individuals from the Black community that contributed a lot to the history of this county, but also to the well-being of the community. So today, I'm going to highlight Z.W. Mitchell, an African-American activist that lived for a time here in Sangamon County. But before I do, I have some really good news for those of you who tuned in to our last program about George Ford. So Major Ford, as you remember from the last episode, was the camp butler supervisor for the cemetery. And he was good friends with Theodore Roosevelt, who became president, and then a few other individuals. And I gave you some resources to look at to learn more about him. Well, I received an email from the Library of Congress stating that they actually have letters from George Ford in the Theodore Roosevelt collection, which is so neat. And I have a few links to share with you regarding that. So I hope you'll be able to journey to the Library of Congress's website in the National Archives to do some more digging into the Major George Ford research. So I will share those links within the comment section of this video and for the George Ford video. So stay tuned. There may be more out there for us to discover about Major George Ford. So today's person, Z.W. Mitchell. So in researching his story, he is a very interesting person. So Mitchell was an activist within the community. And let me pull up my PowerPoint for you. I have a few images to share with you. All right, so his name was Zedekiah Mitchell. I'm pretty sure I got his first name wrong, but if you do know how to say it, let me know, because I'm always trying to learn how to pronounce people's names correctly. So Mitchell was a resident of Springfield, Illinois for only a few years, and he was kind of a controversial leader of the movement that eventually created the city's Douglas Community Center, which is a social and cultural agency that served African Americans for over 30 years. Now, I couldn't find an image of him. I dug and could not find anything. So if you do have an image of Z.W. Mitchell, please let me know, because he's a very fascinating person, and I am looking forward to seeing what he looks like. Now, when I was discovering a lot of Mitchell, I went, of course, to Sangamon Link. Sangamon Link is kind of my encyclopedia for all things Sangamon County. So if you're looking for any type of specific research, I would recommend that you go there first. The editors for the Sangamon Link through the Sangamon County Historical Society has done a wonderful job here. And luckily, when you do research on Sangamon Link, they list their sources. So you're able to go and find out where they got their images, where they got their research. So it's a great resource to use. And in the case of Z.W. Mitchell, I would never have heard about him if it wasn't for Sangamon Link, because I have a tendency to go on to this blog and actually just read it for fun. So I encourage you to do that as well. So as I looked him up, he was connected with a few articles. And I ended up finding out that in the midst of discovering his research and work on the Douglas Community Center, he also had his hand in the Centennial Cooperative Educational Congress of 1908. And I'll get to that here in a little bit. Now, when you do a little bit of research on the Douglas Community Center, you find out that it was not just a civic and social and educational center for individuals to better themselves, but also have this community group. It provided opportunities for African Americans in Springfield to unite and have a community of their own within the segregated areas of Springfield. Because at the time, Springfield was still a bit divided. And Springfield has had certain sections in certain neighborhoods that divided them. And during this time, the African American community really needed a community center where everyone could come together and unite and make friends and form a community. Now, the Douglas Center was named after Frederick Douglass and opened in 1926. Now, eventually, it was phased out as part of Mayor Nelson O. Hayworth's drive to desegregate Springfield in the 1950s. But it was supported by a lot of private charities, and the center was administered largely and was funded by the city's Playground and Recreation Commission. So the Douglas Center played a vital role within the community. And where Mitchell comes into play was at the early stages of developing this type of community center. And he became very well known within the community after 1918. And originally it was called the Colored Center, and it was located, for those of you who are familiar with the Springfield area, it was located at 1127 West Monroe Street. Now, the facility lasted only a couple of years, but it prompted the Council for Social Agencies. It was kind of an umbrella group for local charities to begin working within the city on a more permanent basis. So it was a grouping of organizations and charities that decided to put together resources for those in need. Now, a public and private coalition bought and remodeled a house on 1610 East Jackson Street to, quote, to become a recreational and social center for the colored citizens of Springfield, according to the State Journal, September 26th of 1926. They also go on to state within the article that the center will be used by the YWCA, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and all activities prompted by the Douglas Community Service League, including dramatic clubs, glee clubs, social groups, and civic units. Through the courtesy of Lincoln Library, a branch library also will be maintained there. So a branch of the Lincoln Library, which we still have today. So within the center, Z.W. Mitchell was at kind of the root of creating it for the community. And a lot of the activities they had there, they had picnics, they played horseshoes, they had volleyball games, they were able to formulate kind of what the YMCA is today. Now, sadly, the YWCA, the building was torn down a few years ago, and it's now being questioned on what to do in that lot within Springfield. And so history tends to come back into the fold as the years progress. And that historic building may no longer be here, but the stories of what was done there still continue to be discussed. Now, the Jackson Street building became overcrowded as soon as it opened. So there was a great need for this building to be here and the facilities that it was able to offer for groups. And later on, the Douglas Center ended up moving to 1928 moved in 1928 to 1530 East Capitol Avenue. And the center shared quarters with the Springfield Urban League, which is still around today. Now, they took on a larger role with programs at the center, and so the Urban League decided to offer some other charitable programming for the individuals that used the service within the Douglas Center. And so in 1932, they bought a 3-story, 17-room building on 234 South 15th Street. And both organizations, so the Urban League and the Douglas Center, both moved there. And the building was known as the Old Gray Lady, and was once the home of John Priest, who was the mayor of Springfield in 1870. Now, the 15th Street Center provided meeting space for groups like the NAACP, the YWCA's Phyllis Wheatley Club, Boy and Girl Scouts, and others. And it maintained a reputation for being a recreational facility. They offered different activities for students and organized different drama groups, arts and crafts classes, track meets, different excursions. They had a playground. They created a basketball team, which within some of the research I've been able to find, in the SGR, there was a picture of their basketball team. They had choral groups, music programs. They ended up having a number of different types of activities. And this building continued to have a good effect within the community. Now, in May 1933, it announced that there would be a ping pong tournament. And then there was a basket weaving class. And then there was a Springfield Forum discussion group with a speaker talking about the Council of Social Agencies, which gained a lot of interest among community members. There were also programs on nutrition. And when you look at the other programs, it was also for how to care for your children, so child care classes as well. Now, when Nelson Howarth was elected to his first term as mayor in April of 1955, he began quickly to rid city government of holdovers from days of routine racial segregation. And one of the Recreation Commission's first actions under the Howarth was to close the Douglas Center, which was a year-round facility. And they decided to transfer a lot of the activities and classes that were offered at the center to nearby Withrow Elementary School. Now, the Urban League stayed at that location and until 1961, and the league turned the building over to the city of Springfield. And the city transferred it to the Boys and Girls Club, the Boys Club, which is now the Boys and Girls Club of Central Illinois. And later on, when the building was no longer in use, it was eventually demolished in March of 1961. So if there is anyone who is watching this video who used to go to the Douglas Center or went to the Old Gray Lady building, I would love to hear your stories because the experiences you may have had there will offer a lot of insight to what the Douglas Center was all about. Now, I give you all this background information because in the story of Mitchell's life and how he came to develop this center centers around a lot of what he did within the Centennial Cooperative Educational Congress back in 1918. Now, the Black Springfieldians observed Illinois' 100th anniversary in 1918 with a 3-day conference examining the status, progress, and prospects of the state's African-American community. Some 3,000 people attended the Centennial Cooperative Educational Congress, which was held September 22nd through the 24th in 1918 at the Illinois State Arsenal, which you can see downtown by the state capitol today. The dates were chosen because September 22nd was the anniversary of President Lincoln's issuing the 1862 Preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. Now, the cooperative education theme of the Congress referred to the need to educate both whites and blacks about the importance of two races working together, according to an elaborate 3-page announcement of the event published in July 21st of 1918 in the Illinois Journal. Now, the Congress was expected to recommend a creation of permanent commission to deal with, quote, all matters touching the relations of white and colored people, with the race problem in all of its phases placed in the course of an ultimate harmonious solution. So as to provide a solution for people to come together from both white communities and black communities within the Springfield area. The conference promoted speakers that included blacks and whites. The first day's keynote was delivered by Colonel Roscoe Conkling Simmons, who was the nephew of an African-American educator, Booker T. Washington. Simmons' speech focused on the sacrifices of black soldiers fighting in World War I. Quote, he stated, death knows no color line and bullets know no race. He said the first soldier to place a foot on French soil was a black soldier, and a black soldier will probably be the last one to leave French soil. Besides the Arsenal discussions, the conference highlights included a parade from the Black Masonic Hall at 8th and Washington Streets to the Arsenal. The most notable entries the journal reported were depicting cotton picking and a slave ship. Now, the Congress had a little bit of deliberation. They had a few speeches by Reverend Lester Leake Riley, who is the rector of Springfield's Christ Episcopal Church. He demonstrated that even well-meaning whites often held opinions that disparaged African Americans. And Riley would go on to speak about the major issues and controversies. The controversy also centered on the man who came up with the idea for the Congress. So for the whole idea behind this co-education Congress that focused around education. And it centered around Z.W. Mitchell, who is often known as ZW. So Zedekiah. City directories suggest that Mitchell lived in Springfield from about 1917 through 1920. And although he's listed in the 1917 directory as a laborer, Mitchell also sometimes styled himself as a professor, which he might have been qualified to do, but it was uncommon at the time for educated African Americans to support themselves as it wasn't uncommon for them to support themselves through manual or domestic work. In addition to his work on the Cooperative Education Congress, Mitchell was among the leaders of an effort to create a community center, which I talked about earlier as the Douglas Community Center for Black Springfield residents. And the NAACP's magazine the crisis, published a story in May of 1918 that labeled Mitchell as a fraud. In a letter to the Illinois State Journal referencing the crisis article, C.B. Hosmer, a field representative for Washington's Tuskegee Institute, wrote that Mitchell had made a living for 30 years throughout the U.S. and Canada by raising money to open social centers for the young colored people. However, Hosmer did later on write, quote, he always managed to leave the community directly after his welcome wore out. In other words, I have long since been convinced that this man, Mitchell, is an intelligent fraud, fake, and dishonest fellow who has the gift of gab. The Centennial Board, a very worthy effort, is being greatly burdened by Mitchell's connection with it. Hosmer's letter appeared in the Journal September 13th of 1918, 9 days before the Centennial Congress opened. So as a result, Mitchell went unmentioned in the newspaper coverage of the Congress because of this controversy. Being a part of the Congress, he had this overhanging clout over his name and the work that he did. But people continued to move ahead. Plans were made for a African-American Cultural Center. As I stated earlier, it was created, and they formed a number of partnerships. Mitchell also remained a key organizer within this Congress to create better education environments for the community. And he ended up pledging to raise funds for the building. Now, Mitchell and his family lived at 1127 East Monroe Street. He was listed as an educator employed by Community House. So by this, it shows that he was connected to the Douglas Community Center. And his wife and his daughter lived with him as well there. In a lot of the research, most of the time you find his name in city directories, which is where we've only been able to find a lot of what he did. So like his job and occupation and how he was able to move from place to place. Later on, we find in discovering where he was buried eventually, which was in the Metro East area in 1930. Throughout his checkered career, Mitchell's work did have a lasting impact in Springfield. And in 1926, the city government and Black community established the center, like I stated earlier. Now, in looking at his work, and creating the Douglas Center, he left a legacy. He was able to find ways to create a social gathering institution for individuals who really needed it. And the community center would go on to serve the local African-American community here for over 30 years, and was a part of the community center movement for Black people in this community. Now, later on, Jerome Singleton, who eventually became the executive secretary for the Douglas Center, would state, the leadership of Z.W. Mitchell, now deceased, left a legacy here for us through the creation of the Douglas Center. So I hope you were able to learn quite a bit about Z.W. Mitchell. He's a very interesting person. He still has a lot of mystery around him because of that controversy. It would be interesting to know if that really did affect a lot of what he did here in regards to community centers. But we do know that he did get a social movement started to help individuals who really needed a center to communicate and have social interactions with one another and really build a community, and providing a number of health opportunities for the community as well. I would like to thank Sangamon Link for a lot of their resources that I was able to use within this program. They have been of vital importance to the Sangamon Experience because of the rich research that they have done. And they continue to do research that inspires the love of local history, and also stories that you won't hear anywhere else you can find on Sangamon Link. So I want to thank them, and then also encourage you that if you do find other resources and information on ZW Mitchell, I would love to hear about it. Or if you have some personal stories or stories that your family has passed down from interacting at the Douglas Center or with the Urban League in the early years, I would love to hear about it. So feel free to contact us at sangamonexperience@uis.edu. I would love to hear your stories. I learn more and more every day from people who submit their fond memories and sometimes uncomfortable memories of living here in the Sangamon Valley area, and able to learn and to share with everyone else. It's vital that we record the histories that we've experienced, but also what our community and family members have been able to experience throughout their lives as well. So next time when we gather together on Wednesday to celebrate our community trailblazers, we will be talking about Faith Logan and her experience here in living in the Sangamon County area. You may have heard of her through a lot of the African-American stories that were collected at the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. She had lived a very interesting life, and she overcome a lot of obstacles that stood in her way. So I encourage you to come back next Wednesday at noon to hear more about Faith Logan. Thank you so much for joining with me today to hear about our community trailblazers. And I hope you are enjoying the series, and that you will come back next Wednesday to join me yet again on our community trailblazers for Black History Month.